My child, listen carefully. What you're about to hear is a fictional story filled with mystery, emotion, and unexpected twists. For years, everyone believed this marriage was built on love, trust, and honesty. Friends admired it. Family members praised it. Neighbors called it the perfect relationship. No one imagined that beneath the smiles and wedding photographs, a secret had been quietly waiting for the right moment to surface. The strange part was that the secret wasn't hidden by one person alone. Several people knew pieces of the truth, but each believed someone else would reveal it first. As time passed, silence became easier than honesty, and the years slowly buried what really happened. Everything changed on an ordinary afternoon. A dusty envelope was discovered while cleaning an old family cabinet. It had never been opened. The handwriting on the front was instantly recognized by someone who had not seen it in decades. The room fell completely silent. Inside was a letter written just days before the wedding. The first few lines seemed harmless, but with every sentence, the atmosphere grew heavier. The letter described a decision that had been made in secret, a decision that changed the lives of two families forever. No one could believe that such an important truth had remained hidden for so many years. One family member quietly admitted, "I always knew something wasn't right. But I never had the courage to ask." Another lowered their head and whispered, "If this letter had been opened back then, everything would have been different." The more they read, the more forgotten memories returned. Small moments that once seemed meaningless suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Old conversations, strange reactions, and unexpected silences finally began to make sense. But the biggest revelation was still waiting on the final page. There, in just one sentence, was a name nobody expected to see. The room froze. Every eye turned toward the same person. And for the first time in years, someone finally stood up and said, "It's time everyone knows the truth. Don't skip." Because what happened next changed the family's future forever. No one spoke for several long seconds. The silence inside the room felt heavier than any argument that had ever taken place in that house. Every person stared at the letter, wondering whether the words they had just read could really be true. The person whose name appeared on the final page slowly reached for the paper, but before they could touch it, an elderly family member quietly said, "Leave it exactly where it is. We've hidden the truth for far too long. Don't skip." Because this was only the beginning. The letter explained that, just days before the wedding, someone had discovered a life-changing secret about the marriage. Fear spread through the family. Instead of telling the bride and groom, they decided to bury the truth, believing silence would protect everyone's future. They convinced themselves that one small lie would disappear with time. Instead, that lie grew larger with every passing year. One by one, forgotten memories returned. Someone remembered an unexpected phone call that arrived the night before the wedding. Another recalled seeing tears in a family member's eyes during the ceremony. A third admitted they had noticed someone trying to stop the marriage but never understood why. Suddenly, those strange moments no longer seemed like coincidences. The person who had protected the secret for years finally looked around the room and whispered, "I thought I was saving this family. But all I did was delay the pain." The confession stunned everyone. A younger relative asked the question no one else had the courage to ask. If everyone knew something was wrong, why didn't anyone tell the truth? No one had an answer. The letter continued with one final warning. It claimed that another piece of evidence had been hidden in a place that only one family member knew about. Without that evidence, nobody would ever understand the complete story. The entire room immediately began searching through old boxes, wedding albums, forgotten drawers, and locked cabinets. Hours passed, but nothing appeared. Hope slowly began to fade. Then, just as everyone was preparing to give up, a small wooden box slipped from the back of an old shelf. It had never been opened. A faded ribbon was still tied around it exactly as it had been years ago. Someone carefully lifted the lid. The moment they looked inside, their face turned completely pale. Don't skip. Because what was hidden inside that box was even more shocking than the letter itself. The room filled with anxious whispers as everyone leaned closer to the small wooden box. No one wanted to touch what had remained hidden for so many years. The person holding it took a deep breath before carefully lifting out its contents. Inside was an old wedding photograph, a folded note, and a small key attached to a faded ribbon. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then someone turned the photograph over. A handwritten message covered the entire back of the picture. It wasn't addressed to the bride or the groom. Instead, it was written to the entire family. The message began with a single sentence. If you are reading this, it means the truth stayed hidden much longer than I ever imagined. A chill swept through the room. Don't skip. Because every word that followed uncovered another forgotten piece of the past. The note explained that the key belonged to a small safety box that had been rented just weeks before the wedding. Inside, according to the writer, was the final proof that would explain why so many strange events had happened before the marriage. Everyone immediately looked at one another. Everyone froze. No one knew whose voice was waiting inside that recorder, or how hearing it would change the family's future forever. The person closest to the recorder reached out with trembling hands. And just before pressing the play button, they noticed one unexpected detail that made their heart stop. It wasn't addressed to the family. It was addressed to one specific person in the room. The room became completely silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward the name written on the recorder's label. The person whose name appeared there stood frozen, unable to move. Their hands trembled as they slowly picked up the recorder, wondering why a message from so many years ago had been meant only for them. Don't skip. Because the next few minutes would change everything they believed about the past. With a deep breath, they pressed the play button. For a few seconds, only static could be heard. Then a familiar voice filled the room. It was calm, emotional, and unmistakable. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "it means the truth stayed hidden much longer than I ever wanted." Everyone listened without saying a word. The recording explained that, before the wedding, someone had uncovered information that could have completely changed the family's future. But instead of exposing it publicly, they chose to protect the people they loved from immediate heartbreak. They believed that keeping the secret would preserve the family, even if it meant carrying the burden alone. As the message continued, several people quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Small moments from years earlier suddenly made sense: the unexpected silence during family gatherings, the nervous smiles in old photographs, and the strange distance between relatives who had once been inseparable. Then the voice revealed one final instruction. "There is one more letter," it said. "I hid it somewhere no one would think to look. It contains the full story, every decision, and every reason behind what happened. When you find it, don't judge anyone until you've read every single word." The recording ended. No one moved. The family looked around the house once again, this time searching with new determination. Every shelf, every drawer, and every forgotten box was carefully examined. Just as hope began to fade, one of the oldest family members stopped in front of the original wedding portrait hanging on the wall. Something about the frame didn't look right. They carefully lifted it down and noticed that the back panel had been opened before. With shaking hands, they removed the panel. A thin sealed envelope slid onto the floor. Across the front, in faded handwriting, were words that made the entire family gasp. "Do not open until everyone is together." At that exact moment, the front doorbell rang. A visitor had arrived unexpectedly. When the door opened, the family saw someone they hadn't seen in many years. The one person who knew exactly what was inside that final letter. The front door slowly opened. For a few seconds, nobody could recognize the visitor standing outside. Time had changed their face, but not the expression in their eyes. The moment the oldest member of the family looked at them, they whispered in complete shock, "I never thought I would see you again." The visitor stepped inside without saying a single word. Their eyes immediately fell on the sealed envelope lying on the table. They closed their eyes for a moment and took a deep breath before quietly saying, "So, you finally found it. Don't skip." Because everything that had happened over the past few hours was exactly what this person had expected for years. No one understood how the visitor knew about the envelope. Questions filled the room all at once. "Who are you? Why do you know about this letter? What really happened before the wedding?" Instead of answering immediately, the visitor slowly walked toward an old family photograph hanging beside the staircase. They gently touched the frame and smiled with deep sadness. "I was here the night before the wedding," they finally admitted. The room fell silent. Several family members looked at each other in disbelief. They had searched every memory they had, but no one remembered seeing this person during those final hours before the ceremony. The visitor continued speaking. I wasn't invited to stop the marriage. I came because someone begged me to protect the truth until the right time. Those words sent chills through everyone. The oldest relative slowly sat down, unable to hide the tears forming in their eyes. So, all these years, you carried this burden alone? The visitor nodded. I made a promise. No one interrupted. The visitor explained that the evening before the wedding had been filled with confusion, fear, and impossible choices. A discovery had been made that could have destroyed 2 entire families overnight. Some wanted the wedding cancelled immediately. Others believed exposing the truth would only create even greater pain. Arguments continued until sunrise. Voices were raised. Doors were slammed. People cried. Some begged for honesty. Others begged for silence. In the end, one decision changed everything: the secret would remain hidden. Not because everyone believed it was right, but because no one was brave enough to face what would happen if the truth came out. The visitor looked directly at the sealed envelope. That letter was written only after the final decision had already been made. Every person in the room stared at the envelope with growing fear. The youngest member of the family finally asked the question everyone had been avoiding. If opening that letter changes everything, why didn't you destroy it years ago? The visitor gave a heartbreaking smile. Because the person who wrote it made me promise that one day every single member of this family would deserve the complete truth. Silence returned once again. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. No one even noticed how much time had passed. Finally, someone carefully picked up the envelope. The old paper had become fragile with age. The wax seal was still perfectly intact. As trembling fingers prepared to break it open, the visitor suddenly raised their hand. Wait. Everyone froze again. There is something inside that letter you are not prepared to read. The room grew colder. What do you mean? Someone asked nervously. The visitor slowly reached into their coat pocket and removed a second envelope. It looked almost identical to the first one. The same handwriting. The same faded paper. The same wax seal. Gasps filled the room. There were never supposed to be one letter, the visitor whispered. There were always 2. One contained the family's version of the story. The other contained the truth from the person who disappeared immediately after the wedding. For decades, those 2 letters had been kept apart so they would never be read together. The visitor carefully placed the second envelope beside the first. Now both letters rested on the table. Everyone realized that the answers they had searched for all these years were finally within reach. But they also understood something even more frightening. If both letters were opened together, someone's entire life story would be exposed forever. No one had the courage to break the first seal. And just as one family member finally reached forward with shaking hands, a folded note slipped out from beneath the second envelope. Only 7 handwritten words appeared on it. Read this only after the first confession ends. The visitor immediately turned pale. I never knew. There was another message hidden underneath. At that moment, everyone realized the greatest marriage secret had still not been fully revealed. The biggest confession was only beginning. The room remained completely silent. No one dared to move. The 2 sealed letters rested side by side on the table, carrying the weight of decades of unanswered questions. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, the oldest member of the family stepped forward. "We've waited long enough," they whispered. With trembling hands, they carefully broke the seal on the first envelope. Inside was a handwritten confession. The letter explained that, years before the wedding, one unexpected discovery had shaken both families. Fear, pride, and the desire to protect loved ones had led several people to hide the truth instead of revealing it. Every decision that followed was made in silence, and every year that passed made it harder to admit what had really happened. As the confession was read aloud, tears slowly filled the room. People remembered arguments they had forgotten, apologies that were never spoken, and moments that finally made sense after all these years. When the first letter ended, everyone looked toward the second envelope. The visitor quietly nodded. "It's time." The second seal was carefully opened. Unlike the first letter, this one wasn't filled with blame. It was filled with forgiveness. The writer admitted they had spent years hoping the family would eventually discover the truth, not to punish anyone, but to free everyone from the burden of carrying it. They explained that anger had disappeared long ago, replaced only by the hope that one day the family could finally be honest with one another. The final paragraph brought everyone to tears. It read, "If this letter has finally been opened, then my wish has already come true. The greatest secret was never meant to divide this family forever. It was meant to remind you that truth may arrive late, but it still has the power to heal what silence never could." No one spoke. One by one, family members embraced each other. Old misunderstandings faded. Years of guilt began to lift. The visitor smiled for the first time that day. "My promise is finally complete," they said softly. The family carefully placed the 2 letters back into the wooden box, not to hide the truth again, but to preserve the lesson for future generations. From that day forward, they made one promise to each other. No matter how difficult the truth may be, they would never again allow silence to become a family tradition. And that was the biggest marriage secret that had remained hidden for years. Not a scandal. Not a betrayal. But the cost of keeping the truth locked away for far too long. The secret had finally come out. And with it came something the family had not felt in years. Peace.